Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everyone. This is Normani Adam and today's morning I am tasked to explain the reading models. Before we proceed, let me read first our learning objectives. Our learning objectives at the end of the lesson, the students are expected to identify the reading models, compare the bottom-up, top-down, and interactive strategies, and outline different emerging reading models. I prepared the question here, which is, what is reading models? Okay, so what is reading models? Reading models are ways to become a good reader or a method to be used to gain a good reading comprehension. Okay, so the experts or the readers develop the three strategies to be used to every reading situation, which is the bottom-up reading model, the top-down reading model, and the last one is interactive reading models. Okay, so let's start with bottom-up reading model. Okay, so bottom-up reading model, it is a reading model that emphasizes the written or printed text. Says reading model is driven by a process that results in meaning, or in other words, reading is driven by a text and proceeds from part to whole. Okay, so meaning the bottom-up reading model is emphasizing the written or printed texts, or it is the ability to decode or put sound into the text, what you have seen in the text. Okay, so through giving sound into text, it derives meaningful words by simply decoding the letters into words like this. By simply decoding the letters into words, into phrases, and then turns into sentences. So always remember that a bottom-up reading models is putting sound what you have seen in the text. Okay, so now let's proceed to the top-down reading model. Okay, the top-down reading model, it is suggests that processing of a text begins the mind of the reader with meaning-driven process or an assumption about the meaning of a text. The top-down approach emphasizes readers bringing meaning to text based on their experiential background and interpreting text based on their prior knowledge. Meaning, the top-down reading model is pertaining for processing of a text in the mind of a reader and giving a meaning into it using their prior knowledge or background knowledge. So this is the difference between bottom-up reading model and top-down reading model. The top-down reading model is what is called the higher order mental concepts such as knowledge of a reader, the knowledge of a reader, while the bottom-up reading model is pertaining for the physical text on the page. Okay, so now let's proceed to the third part, which is the last part of the models, which is the interactive reading model. Okay, so this is the reading model that recognizes the interaction of bottom-up and top-down processes simultaneously throughout the reading process. So this clearly states that this is the combination of the two models, which is the bottom-up reading model and the top-down reading model. Okay, so the example is when the reader uses the bottom-up strategy until he or she encounter an unfamiliar word that employs decoding skills to achieve comprehension. Okay, so that is an example. When you meet this model, which is the interactive reading model, then you are a good reader. As according to Esky 1998, a good reader are both good decoder and good interpreters of the text. Okay, so those are the three reading models, which is the bottom-up, top-down, and interactive reading models. And aside from that, we also have the emerging reading models. And in emerging reading models, the other reading specialists develop their own reading models. They argue that the conventional models presented may not completely address all the areas of reading comprehension. Okay, so it implies that the specialists proposed their own phases of reading models, which is what we call the emerging reading models. Okay, so we have here the 5 emerging reading models, and let's start in the Rumelhart Model 1977. He states that successful reading is both perceptual and a cognitive process. Stresses the influence of various sources, namely picture extraction, orthographic knowledge, lexical knowledge, synthetic knowledge, and semantic knowledge on the text processing and reader's interpretation. Okay, so in Rumelhart model believes in 5 various sources of text processing and the reader's interpretation. First is the feature extraction. Feature extraction is referring to pattern recognition and image processing. And the second one is the orthographic knowledge, which is referring to the information that is stored in our memory. And the third is the lexical knowledge. The lexical knowledge is the knowledge that can be expressed in words. And the synthetic knowledge is how words can be combined in meaningful and sentences or phrases, while the last is the semantic knowledge. The semantic knowledge is referring to your knowledge in language that involves words, meaning, and vocabulary. Okay, so the second part of the emerging reading models is the Stanovic Model 1980. He introduces the interactive compensatory reading model, says that reader rely on both bottom-up nor top-down process simultaneously, and alternatively depending on the reading purpose, motivation, schema, and knowledge of the subject. It enables researchers to theorize how good and poor reader approach a text. Stanovic model believes that both bottom-up and top-down addresses all the areas in reading. Perhaps, in interactive is the strength of two models, which is the bottom-up and top-down. And the Stanovic model implies that the reader comprehension is depending on their purpose, on their motivation, or their knowledge on the subject. Okay, so now let's proceed to the Anderson and Pearson Schematic View 1984. The Anderson and Pearson Schematic View focuses on the role of schemata, knowledge stored in memory, in text comprehension. Believe that comprehension is the interaction between old and new information. Schemata theory, already known in general ideas, subsume and anchor new information. Okay, so in Anderson and Pearson schematic view is reading, according to them, reading comprehension is focuses on the interaction of two, which is the old and new information, which is the rule of schemata. And now let us know what is schema and the difference on it with schemata. Schemata, knowledge already stored in memory, function in the process of interacting in new information and allowing it to enter and become part of the knowledge. Okay, which means schemata is the knowledge that already stored in our memory, which is the old information and the new information. And it allows another information to enter. For example, you already learned the word kind, and it is your first time to encounter the word kindness. So since they are related, you stored in your mind that the word kindness is related to the word kind in meaning. So the next is schema, an abstract knowledge structure, a structure that represents the relationship among its components part. Okay, so schema is an abstract knowledge. For example is vocabulary. So when you learn new vocabulary or information, we stored it in our schema. Okay, so now let's proceed to Pearson and Tierney reading and writing model. Okay, so in Pearson and Tierney reading writing model states that the reader reads with the expectation that the writer has provided sufficient clues about the meaning. Considers pragmatic theories of language which states that every act, utterance or attempt at comprehending an utterance in action. Context is important. Okay, so in this model, which is the Pearson and Tierney, they believe that the connection between reading and writing gives significance to our comprehension. And according to them, thoughtful readers has these four instructive rules, which is the planner, composer, editor, and monitor. Okay, so in the reader, which is the planner, they create goals using their existing knowledge to comprehend the text. While the composer, according to them, reader is a composer because readers tends to see the relationship of every gaps in the text. And the third is editor. Editor, the reader examines the interpretations, which is very true because we can't comprehend the text when we don't have our own interpretation in what we have reading. While the monitor directs the other three rules, meaning reader is a planner, a composer, and an editor. Okay, so the last part of our emerging reading models is the Mattheson's model of attitude influence. According to him, he addresses the role of the attitude and motivation play in reading. And attitude has componential construct, cognitive component, which is evaluating, affective component, which is feeling, and conative component, which is action readiness. In Matheson reading model, according to him, attitude and motivation plays roles in reading. In attitude, he states that it has componential construct such as the cognitive component, affective component, and the conative component. In cognitive component, which is pertaining for evaluation or the ability of a reader in evaluating the text, while in affective component, which is pertaining to the feeling of a reader about the content of what he or she reading, while in conative component is the readiness of a reader about how they act or their behavior while they are reading. And now let's proceed to our activity. In our activity, use the modified Venn diagram below to compare and contrast the three reading models. So that's the end of our lesson, and for your concern, queries, and additional thoughts, put down your comment in the comment section. And that concludes our topic. Again, Assalamualaikum.